So this past spring, a group of Unitarian Universalists phone banked with UUJAZ to support access to abortions and reproductive health care more broadly in Arizona through Proposition 139. Stephanie Giannini, who works for UUJAZ and who you may have known by the name Stephanie Morales, organized the effort and invited me to do a reading to religiously anchor the action. I kind of dithered and pawed through a bunch of different readings until I landed on this one called Say the Word by Eileen Casey Campbell. So here's a paragraph from that reading. Downstairs in the church kitchen, I never heard anyone say abortion, but I did hear the mothers whisper to one another about which doctor to call. I heard the organist offer rides to a clinic far enough away to not be seen by the prying eyes of God or whoever else. I saw aunties quietly slip round sleeves of pills into teenagers' shaky hands. And in the Sunday school hallway, they took up collections of their own sort to pay for a nameless procedure for Mary Teresa or Mary Angela or Mary Elizabeth or somebody inevitably named for that single unmarried mother. End quote. I was thinking about this reading today, for the sermon today, because to me it highlights the way that recognizing and articulating our needs is fundamental to justice work. Many of the great social movements start with this very thing. Start with people talking together about what they need, and then finding ways to meet those needs together. And there is this more complicated layer, right? It comes when other groups of people, or just a few people with a lot of power, try to block those needs from getting met. And this is especially heartbreaking when those needs are for things like food, or a place to live, or basic safety, or getting to decide what happens to our own bodies. When I think about a Unitarian Universalist take on justice, in particular, this is one of the places I start. Because it places care at the center, love at the center of justice. It's our care of ourselves and one another that allows us to articulate our own needs, our own feelings, and to respond to the needs and feelings of others. And then to build those networks of care into movements and organizations. Okay, and now we're moving to the part of the sermon that I honestly felt the oddest about in terms of the news we got today. So it just felt a little strange to sort of be holding grief and death, and then also be like, my sermon is about institutional history. So I'm going to talk about institutional history, but I'm also going to give an extra invitation that if that is just not where you are today, that's okay. I am totally not fussed. If you want to take a second to leave the sanctuary, if you want to stand in sunshine by a tree, if you want to do some art, get some water, whatever you need. So for those of you who may not know, Benji sort of lifted this up, but I started work as the co-director of finance and operations for the organization Unitarian Universalist Justice Arizona Network. We're also often called UUJAZ, or acronymed to UUJAZ. UUJAZ generally is an organization whose scope is UU justice work in the state of Arizona. And what UU justice work has meant has changed over the course of the organization's life. So first off, this year is officially UUJAZ's 10-year anniversary. And so for me, that was this invitation to learn about those past 10 years and do some reflecting on them. And as I was doing that, I started to really think of it as two different 5-year eras in the organization's history. The first era being the first 5 years. Those years were really focused on legislative ministry. So seeing change at the legislator and that structural way of answering needs as the primary place to make a difference. So some of you may have participated in UU Day at the legislature, where folks met with their representatives as an example of this justice model. And I want to say that approach to justice makes a lot of sense given the fact that UUJAZ was founded only a few years after SB 1070, a racist anti-immigration law, was passed in Arizona in 2010. So overturning and fighting that law was a compelling, legislatively focused need throughout the state of Arizona. And the other thing that I think that characterizes this beginning era is that it was the beginning. One of the things I've been doing for UUJAZ for the past few months is going through organizational documents. So I have seen evidence of the work the first folks did to found an organization. Work like filling out forms and organizing committees and dreaming together. And I want to shout out this aspect of meeting needs, of the sometimes boring and ordinary ways that we show up for one another. So first era, and then I think of the second era. And when I think of the second era of UJAZ, I think of the pivot point being when Janine Gelsinger was hired as executive director. And the second era feels to me like it shifted from a legislative focus to a partner focus. And by that, I mean that if the justice model in the first era was really focused on the state legislator being sort of this locus of justice work, I think the second era was more characterized by focusing on meeting the needs of partner organizations. So partner organizations here meaning justice organizations, generally secular, and in particular that are led by folks who are most affected by a justice issue. In this model, I hear deep resonance to the idea that folks who have a deep need for something like safety that are being blocked from meeting that need are best positioned to name what that need is, what it encompasses, and what it feels like to have it be met. I think UJAZ in this era also embraced the wider UU world more broadly. I'm thinking about things like that the organization having more focus on getting grants and funding from national UU groups and connecting to the wider UU ecosystem for training and resources. And part of that being connecting Arizona UUs to these wider UU resources with organizations like UU The Vote and the Beloved Conversations training. And if those are the first two eras of UJAZ, what will this next one be like? When I think of this question, it seems like the heart of it is about what Arizona UUs and congregations need right now, particularly in the realm of justice work. So one immediate need we are helping with is abortion access. So here's some words that Stephanie sent me to help inspire us all. Arizona has emerged as one of the latest political battlegrounds in the debate over abortion rights. Arizona voters will soon have a say in abortion access through a citizen-initiated ballot measure, Prop 139, that would amend the state constitution to protect abortion for all Arizonans. All eyes will be on Arizona in the coming months as citizens lead the charge in determining the fate of abortion access in the state. In Arizona, if we do not vote yes on Proposition 139, we're facing an unacceptable reality. The 15-week ban currently in place that harms survivors of rape and incest, and punishes those experiencing pregnancy complications, and it would remain the law of the land. If that is the outcome, lives would be put at risk and basic rights would be out of reach for millions of Arizonans just as they are for millions of pregnant folks across the United States. And I want to also offer an invitation. So if you're interested, UUJAZ and You the Vote will, this October we'll be having a canvassing effort. We have some UUs from out of the state coming in to help. And if you're interested in canvassing, there's a sign-up sheet at the back of the sanctuary. And you can put your name and contact information down, and I'll connect you with Stephanie. And I also want to lift up, in the vein of different types of justice, that a number of you have already signed up to offer home hospitalities to folks who are coming from out of the state to do this canvassing work in Arizona. Offering people a place to be, offering the care of housing, is absolute justice work. Thank you, thank you. So we're doing this immediate need work around this election cycle, and we're also holding a longer-term vision. Part of that is internally doing work to build sustainable organizational systems. And part of that is that we'll be holding some in-person meetings for you justice leaders throughout Arizona after the election. We want to hold these spaces for UUs to have conversations together, again, from across the state together, about what our needs are right now. We intend to create time and space for you staff and congregations to co-learn and reflect on our organizational, state, and national histories, and to develop a shared analysis around the work of justice for right now, organizing liberation and what it means to succeed. Now, to draw us down to the end, I actually want to go back to the beginning of this sermon. One of the questions I sometimes sit with is, why do justice work? Like, what is the actual answer that gets my very introverted self out of the house and out at protests or knocking on doors? And I think the answer is actually from the beginning of the sermon. The answer of that deep sense of care for one another. Because, and fair warning, this is some religious-y language, I think justice work is a way of doing Unitarian Universalist salvation. I was in a discussion of Winding the Circle of Concern, which is a report about racism and Unitarian Universalism and looking at how to address it. And I was talking about that report with the now Reverend Jamili Omar. So for those of you who don't know, Reverend Jamili Omar is a UU minister from Tucson who was just ordained to the ministry yesterday. And we had this conversation a while ago, and we were talking about how in some religions, salvation is a thing that happens after you die. And in some religions, salvation is a thing that God or a God brings or gives to you. In some religions, salvation is a sort of very personal, reflective, internal affair. And I would say, in Unitarian Universalism, we create salvation through our justice work, through caring for our own and one another's needs. And I do mean that in a broad way, that there is salvation in small moments of grace and transformation. There is salvation in our everyday care for one another. There is salvation in yearning and building a world, yearning for and building a world where more people's needs are met. So I'll end with a hope, a prayer, and a call for more UU salvation.